Hey Supercharger, let's demo gradients a little bit in Figma. Again, they should work similarly in any other design tools, so even though maybe the exact steps of how to turn a fill into a gradient might not be the same, it's going to be really easy. Just like Google how to add a gradient to a layer that you're working with, and you should be able to follow along. So one thing that you're going to see in here, instead of a solid color fill, I switched it to a linear fill. And this is the first example of a gradient. So it's just like, it's gonna be the same hue. And here you can see that the hue is 0. The only difference is one is a bit darker and the other one is a little bit lighter. And that's a first example of a gradient because it's really subtle, but it gives you that kind of sense of depth in here. And again, with a lot of things in UI design, going subtle is usually going to be more common choice, unless you have like an eclectic brand or like something that's really going to be in your face, neon, like fighting for my attention, Gen Z types of brands sometimes, all of those things. Those are maybe the areas where you're not going to be following these exact tips and you're actually purposefully going to do the opposite to kind of do the effect and achieve the effect that you want to. That's going to work well with the type of brand and that type of project. But most often gradients are actually going to be better if they're subtle. So one approach is just like using the same hue and just like shifting the saturation and brightness a little bit on the 2 points that we have in a gradient. And you can see it in here. So like the point is here on the top and here you can switch it around. I usually either like place it to the exact end or place it a little bit outside to give it more of a fading effect. But just like when you're doing and creating gradients, also be aware that maybe your developer for that type of project and that type of platform might not be able to achieve the same effect. So like discuss it with them to see if everything that you want to achieve is actually doable. Most of the basic stuff is going to be, but if you're going a little bit overboard and kind of creating some of these things, maybe that's not going to be doable. So just keep it in mind. Like it doesn't matter what is going to be in your design file. What matters is what is actually doable and it's going to end up in the end product. So if you're doing something wild and it's not going to be able to be developed, like ignore it and don't do it. Another thing that you can do is you can have like 2 different color points in your gradient, and one of them is just like slightly in one or the other direction, so like left or right on the color wheel from your original point. So in here we have a yellow starting point and a little bit of an orange starting point for the second point. So even if you don't adjust saturation and brightness at all, it still works as a gradient because those 2 colors are very close to each other on the color wheel and they work well together. Next example is using 2 colors that are both very vivid and bright, and you're gonna see it in some projects and you're gonna see it a lot in beginner design projects because you have like fun way to play around with gradients, and those are the 2 colors that are like really vivid and bright and like look very good. But like just think of an interface where you're gonna be using this and how bombarded the user would feel if they have so many different clashing elements like fighting for their attention. So honestly, to me, if I'm using like this bright green, I would probably for the next point use something a little bit darker and more muted to make it work. Again, these 2 are not as close to each other on the color wheel, so sometimes the middle shades are not working that well together. So what I would do is I would create a middle point just by pressing in here like I did, and maybe like adjust it slightly so that it feels like the transition is a little bit smoother. One other thing that I do like to be careful about when it comes to gradients is unless there is like a very noticeable light source in your design, you don't want to go against nature. And I show it in this example because the brighter point of this gradient is actually in the kind of lower left and the darkest point is somewhere on the top. So it feels like there is some kind of a light source on the floor lighting everything up in a really dark room. most naturally we would expect it to actually be reversed. So like I would grab this point and kind of switch them around. And this already feels a little bit more natural, just because we always assume that the light is coming from the top. In the nature, when you're walking around, the sun is going to be there. Even if it's dark, the lights on the streets might be there, and in your house and room or wherever you're located and situated, like light is usually coming from the ceiling, or at least somewhere in the upper area. So just like follow that along as you're designing, like try to replicate our expectations from the real world. In here, in this example, you can really see that these 2 points are very far away from each other on the color wheel. So how to solve it? Create the middle point, and it's not maybe going to create a good middle point, but you can create one that's like somewhere in here, or this one, but then just like turn it lighter. Because again, like if you think about this is somewhere the pink area, and this is the green area. The middle point in between them can be this like yellowish orange, or it can be this kind of cyan blue part. So like both of them are going to work, but you need to find something that's going to maybe work better. And you can try out both options and see what feels better. Again, in here, it feels like this part is getting gray again. So I'm not really happy. I think I'm going to revert it to the orange one. One thing that I do highly suggest not exploring is having a fill like this one that has so many points. So usually like 3, maybe 4, but like 3 should be your maximum amount of like middle points that you're going to be using in your design. And again, what you can do in Figma and a lot of design tools is switching between like linear fill to radial fill to angular fill. So just like know that there is an option to do that, but like honestly, would you ever want this in your design? There's maybe like 1 or 2 project types where I can kind of think where it could be useful, but again, not in the extreme example that I just shown in here. So I would probably limit it to less options and maybe work with something that's gonna work better. Again, in here you can see that these 3 colors are rarely gonna make a good gradient. Maybe just by shifting this to this and introducing something like a green one in here is going to make it work better. What you want to avoid when you're creating gradients is having like this very noticeable peak points where a color is switching to a different one. So I'd probably like look at how to achieve a similar effect without having that really strong break in here. When it comes to gradients in UI needs that you're going to have in your projects, one way that you can really use gradients is using it as an overlay. And don't think that every single point in your gradient needs to be fully visible and opaque. You can use transparency or opacity to kind of achieve an effect of like fading into transparent color. And that's going to be very common where you have background photos and you want to ensure that the text is readable on them. So you can see in this example, the top point is basically transparent and this point is dark. And in here, overall, the entire gradient has some kind of an opacity of 40. And if we remove it from this layer, you can really see that areas like these where there is a light gray background, the text might not be readable enough. Again, because most of the background is black and dark, you can still read most of it. So even if you just can read this is a readable T, you can still maybe guess what the word is going to be. But overall, by adding a subtle gradient like this one, and you can even play around with a point, like maybe it can be somewhere around here in the middle, so that you're not covering so much of your original image. But that's one way to kind of help solve for the cases where you might not even know what the background is going to be because the user is uploading something. So just keep in mind that gradients are really useful in areas like this. In here, I wanted to show you one other example of like how you can use gradients, and that's for backgrounds, where this element that we have in here in our design, think of it maybe like a header or something, is actually demoing the product really well because it's using like a gradient radial fill. So it feels like there's more focus put on the product itself because there's some kind of a light behind it, kind of lighting it up and drawing our attention to it. So it's really useful for headers if you're going to be designing websites to kind of use maybe a gradient fill somewhere to draw attention to an element that you want to draw attention to. And that when I was creating this, it kind of reminded me that some products and some websites are also using gradients in different ways, which is on text itself. And you can see that usually what they do is they're bringing in the colors for the gradient from the photo, or they're using some branded colors to create that effect. So again, another thing to keep in mind if you're designing, just like a little prompt for you when you're working with gradients. That's basically it. Like, please don't abuse them too much. Think about where they're really needed and if they're going to bring benefits to your project, and if they are, like how subtle do you want them to be, or like how in your face do you want them to be. If you want them to be in your face, please don't abuse it too much throughout the product or the screen that you're designing, because it's going to create an effect that's not going to be nice for your user, where they're going to be bombarded with so much color and so many things happening on the screen that they might actually like leave your product. So just keep it in mind, and that's it. Thank you for following along and watching this video.